We are grateful to have one of our parents here today to speak. Mr. Jon Meacham is a distinguished historian. He has written numerous books on U.S. presidents and is a frequent commentator about political events, but his base and his focus is on how we look at history. And he's going to talk to us this morning about democracy. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jon Meacham.
Thank you, Headmaster. I'm delighted to be here. I will tell you quickly, the first time I spoke at one of my children's schools, some of you may have been there. I'm sure you remember it very clearly because it was about 12 years ago. It was at Innsworth years ago, and I was on my way to talk about, it was basically kindergarten through 6th grade, I guess, right? And I was on my way over. It was President's Day. I'm kind of the go-to guy for obscure federal holidays. You know, if you have one, you call me. I insist on believing that Jon Stewart was paying me a compliment when he once referred to me as a geek Wikipedia. So he didn't mean it that way, but I insist on that. So I was on my way over and I was thinking, all right, how can I make presidential history interesting to kindergarten through 6th, 7th, 8th grade? So it occurred to me to talk about blood and vomit. Okay, so bear with me. I said, you know, presidents are people. They are human beings. They're not all on Mount Rushmore. Andrew Jackson was once in a duel, and he let the other man shoot him first, and his boot filled with blood, and then he lowered his gun and shot the other man dead. And there was some flickers, you know, in the audience. And then I said, how many of you have thrown up on someone? And I'm here to report that a disturbingly high percentage of Innsworth students 10 years ago eagerly reported having thrown up on someone. There are lots of hands and excitement. And so I said, okay, well, George Herbert Walker Bush, when he was President of the United States in 1992, went to Japan for a banquet and threw up on the Prime Minister of Japan next to him. And my point being that presidents are human beings. They have good days and bad days. Honest to God, that night I got 32 emails from mothers saying, was it true I had said, go home and throw up on someone and you too can be President of the United States? So my goal here is to be a little clearer than I was then. Does it come news to anyone that this is an inflection point for the constitutional republic that has been in operation since Virginia and New York barely ratified the Constitution in 1788, leading to George Washington's first inaugural on the 30th of April, 1789. We are under the most significant stress and strain for that constitutional order, certainly since 1932-33, and arguably since the 1860s. In 1932-33, we lived in a moment where Franklin Roosevelt, who was coming to power at a moment of enormous economic calamity, actually said the two most dangerous men in America were Huey Long and Douglas MacArthur. Huey Long was a populist from Louisiana who could lead a revolt from the socialist left, and Douglas MacArthur was the Army Chief of Staff who could lead a revolt from the fascist right. And so I know that this feels unique. It is not entirely unique, but it is incredibly important. And I just want to take a few minutes to both point out that the forces that are shaping us are perennial. No single election, no single transition, if we ever get to one, no single piece of legislation will ever fully resolve the forces that shape us for ill and for good. America is fundamentally shaped by ambition, appetite, greed, selflessness, selfishness, because we are a human enterprise. A republic is, in fact, the sum of its parts. The word itself comes from the public thing. And what is the public, if not all of us? And so the founders, for all their imperfections, and they were manifold, understood that we would be driven by impulses that would arguably almost always put our personal gain ahead of a common good. And so one of the main reasons the Constitution of the United States makes it so hard to do anything quickly is because the founders assumed that most of what we would want to do quickly would be bad. And hence the division of power, hence divided sovereignty, the manifestation of what Montesquieu had written about and that came to Philadelphia through the Enlightenment. So I've argued that the soul of the country, the soul of America, is best understood not as all good or all bad. And depending on where you voted, certainly for the first time, or you're thinking about voting, or your parents, or whatever you're seeing on cable or on your phone, you're either pretty happy or you think that there's a socialist cliff we're about to go over. This is not a new debate. I think that the soul of the country is not all good or all bad. I see it as an arena of contention. In Hebrew and in Greek, soul means breath or life. When God breathes life into man in Genesis, that word can be translated as soul. When Jesus says in the Greek New Testament, greater love hath no man than this, than to lay down his life for his friends, life could be translated as soul. And so in the American soul, there's Martin Luther King, there's the Ku Klux Klan, there's grace, there's rage, there's kindness, there's cruelty, there's sin, there's redemption, there are good days, there are bad days, because it is a human undertaking. We are the sum of our parts. St. Augustine has the best definition of a nation I've ever run across, in which he said in the City of God, that a nation is a multitude of rational beings united by the common objects of their love. A multitude of rational beings united by the common objects of their love. So I want to take those 2 points, expand on them a little bit, and then let you get on with your day. Rational. Reason lies at the heart of the American experiment and has to lie at the heart of the human experience. So the American experiment and human experience. Democracies work. America works. Our lives work when we actually are curious about the world around us, where changing data, where shifting circumstance, where contrary evidence is not resisted because it doesn't fit with a pre-existing worldview that we may have, but when we take it on board and perhaps in light of those changing facts, shifting circumstance, and new data, change our minds. America was founded, not least, to give the capacity of reason, the work of your mind, a chance against what the 18th century saw as passion. In our world, we call it polarization or partisanship or tribalism. You should never let one single Twitter feed or one single cable network tell you what to think. That's not what America's about. America at its best is about manifesting this Enlightenment idea that we can, in fact, learn from experience and act on it. So we have to be curious and reasonable, rational, as St. Augustine said. And America was the manifestation of a lot that was unfolding. When Thomas Jefferson wrote what became the most important sentence ever originally rendered in English, that all men were created equal and were endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a sentence that has changed more lives around the world and continues to do so. I will parenthetically say that I know that's a hyperbolic claim to say it's the most important sentence ever rendered in English, which reminds me of the old story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools down in Texas and said on the campaign trail one day, if English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas. So I hesitate that. I told that story to George W. Bush once when he was governor of Texas. He went, that's pretty funny, asshole. So it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. But in any event, sorry, headmaster. your headmaster and I share an educational background at the University of the South, which we think of as Downton Abbey meets Deliverance, for those of you who are looking at Sewanee. When Jefferson wrote that sentence, he was not doing so in a vacuum. He was doing so because of Gutenberg, the invention of movable type, which democratized information and spread literacy and capitalism, the Protestant Reformations, which translated the world from being seen as vertical to more horizontal, where popes and princes and prelates and kings, who either by an accident of birth or an incident of election had been given automatic and autocratic authority over all of us, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, the Scottish moral enlightenment, all of these forces were unfolding, heading into the creation of the American experiment. And so this reorientation of life from being top down to being more horizontal, for all of its exclusions, imperfections, and unfinished business and dreams deferred, was the central shift in Western life. But it was made possible because of reason and curiosity and the capacity to change your mind and not simply put on a jersey of one side or the other and charge that line no matter what. So I would urge you, for the sake of the country and for the sake of your own sanity, to always be open to reason and curiosity. Democracy depends on it. Democracy without that becomes an autocracy of opinion. And that might be okay if you have a majority at a given moment, but I promise you all of human experience says that if you're counting on autocracy, you better make sure you're always in the majority, because the majority always flips. And if you respect everybody on the front end, if you give that respect, they'll give it to you when the tide turns. And I promise you this, the tide always turns. So, reason and curiosity. The other is empathy. It is absolutely essential that we see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. The most radical commandment in the history of the world is love your neighbor as yourself. Who the hell wants to do that? Right? I like my neighbor, most of them. I wish them well, but do I love them as much as I love myself and my son and his sisters and our Springer Spaniels? No, I don't. Again, I'm fine. I don't wish them any harm. But what every key religious tradition and moral tradition teaches us is that radical and revolutionary commandment that we have to at least try to love our neighbors as ourselves. And in the effort, in the trying, comes grace, and comes forbearance, and comes a point where you're going to be in a conversation about what should happen with this tax rate or this piece of foreign policy or this or that. And if you are open to that forbearance, if you are open to seeing people as a neighbor and not as an implacable foe, then 95% of the time, you're going to have those conversations and you're going to think, nah, they're wrong, I'm right. But I promise you, law of averages, that 5% of the time, you're going to, if you listen, you'll think, maybe they have a point. And I'd submit to you that the best of America happens when you think, maybe they have a point. And that requires empathy, requires forbearance, and that opens the way to grace and potentially progress and light. I'll leave you with this. This is the best definition of democracy I've ever come across. You can't be for democracy when you win and against it when you lose. That's not the way this works, right? This is E.B. White. I'm sure y'all might get taught E.B. White now and then. Once More to the Lake, some other great essays. You certainly know Charlotte's Web. I hope you've read later stuff too. E.B. White, in 1943, defined democracy in a piece in The New Yorker. And President Roosevelt came across it and loved it. So this is E.B. White on democracy. 77 years ago. Democracy is the line that forms on the right. It's the don't in don't shove. Democracy is the recurrent suspicion that more than half the people are right more than half the time. It's the feeling of privacy in the voting booths, the feeling of communion in the libraries, the feeling of vitality everywhere. Democracy is a letter to the editor. It's the score at the top of the ninth. It's an idea which hasn't been disproved yet, a song the words of which have not gone bad. FDR ripped that out of the magazine, and he'd read it to people who came into his office, and he'd say, "Them's my sentiments exactly." I think they should be all our sentiments. Thank you.